This week, Sunny joins me to interview Alexz Lee, a senior game designer on the Legends of Runeterra team who's worked on plenty of aspects of the game, including live balance and most recently, including the newest release, Magic Misadventures. We'll interview him about the champion creation, the design process behind all of it, and much more. As always, we are brought to you by Runeterra CCG, your home for anything you need for Legends of Runeterra, including opinion pieces, deck lists, guides, and much, much more. If you aren't tuned in there, you're surely missing out. Hope you guys enjoy this episode, and I'll see you at the end of it. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Twin Suns Podcast, episode 81. Joining me today is our good friend from the Netherlands, Sunny. Sunny, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Hey, we're happy to have you back. Weird circumstances, but you're going to join me for an interview here with Alexz Lee. Alexz Lee, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, really appreciate you coming on. Real quick, just for anyone who missed the first episode with you, can you give us a quick rundown of your role over at Legends of Runeterra?
Yeah, so I'm a senior designer on Legends of Runeterra on the content team, and so I've been a set lead for set 2, as well as kind of helped out with a bunch of other stuff, and most recently was one of the design leads for the Battle City expansion as a whole, as well as Magical Misadventures, and I'm the current live design lead.
Perfect. And obviously that is why you are here. We were recording this on the day of the release of Magic Misadventures, so we were very excited. I think Sunny's been playing Pantheon all day. That's what I've been doing as well. So very
Targon
hyped.
boys.
Yep. We got to keep it true. We got a Targon expansion. We had to come through. So yeah, we're going to talk to you all about that new release. But real quick, just want to open it up with a couple questions about the previous release, if you don't mind. Talk about general things about beyond the Bandlewood. So first off, I guess, how did you feel about the overall reception to the Bandlewood?
Yeah, I think overall it was pretty exciting to see like players just building some really crazy stuff. Like we always have our kind of internal thought process around like, hey, we think this archetype will be cool and we think this archetype will be interesting, but the just kind of like the sheer number of decks that we've seen pop up, as well as like the kind of like the things that we thought would be cool and fringe. Like I think Shellfolk is one. Me personally, when I designed that card, I was like, this would be like a cute little, like a meme deck, and someone will have like one cool thing, and then I saw Cephalod Pod's deck pop up, and I'm like, oh no. And then to see it like not be just like, oh, it's not going to get hard countered. This is actually like a very solid deck with multiple things. I'm like, oh, okay. So that stuff's been awesome. I think beyond that, it's been cool to see. I think fans of Yordles in general, from coming from like League and like the like League IP in general, kind of always feel a little like by the wayside because those champions they're not always front and center. Having like an entire expansion dedicated to that, it was cool to see those fans like kind of have their birthday party, and that's been awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Sonny, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, we also like. What are your thoughts on the cards that were released this expansion so far, like the 4 champions in particular, and some of their accompanying cards? Like, what are some of the cards that are supposed to bring those archetypes to their full power level?
Yeah. So this is. I think this set in particular is an interesting example of we tried to design each release so that like the champions that they had would have something to play with. So it's cool for in this case where it's like Pantheon kind of has a complete-ish deck that we think there's there, but he'll kind of get his full one later. But it seems, at least for so far today, players have been finding some really interesting kind of things to pair him with. I've seen like a Zoe version. There's been I think some talk of like a Riven version that might be cool. Ahri Kenne is I think it's been the current kind of popular favorite that I've been seeing from like streamers and friends that have or people that have messaged me about it. I think that's kind of like doing what we wanted to do. And then Rumble is probably the weirdest one, and I think he's probably going to take the longest time to kind of figure out because the deck is very interesting. But it was kind of nice to see like have that second half come in, especially since the Scion Draven deck already felt like a complete package. So providing players with a kind of what is essentially an alternate deck to play or archetype to kind of figure out when they've already kind of felt like they solved it is I'm like that's probably the one I'm most excited to see like what happens with it over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, these cards are going to support the current set so crazily. You did shout out cephalopods, the deck there. Did you have any other particular favorite community creation between all of the other things that you saw during the first release?
Yeah, there was a number. I wish I had the list, but I think some of the most recent ones that I've seen. Well, this was actually an archetype, but the fact that it kind of like rose to power that it did. But darkness, just in general, we were all surprised because that
Yeah,
felt like a deck where it was going to be a pet deck, and then it not being a pet deck and like it actually having some prominence, especially during Worlds, was great.
yeah, really.
I think the Lulu Jinx discard deck is pretty cool and very neat and a little surprising to see that kind of running around. There's also, I think it's like a Talia. There's like a Talia X champion deck that I think it's, yeah, the Talia Ziggs deck actually, yeah, where it was in testing when we were playing around. They were like, oh, this is neat. Maybe this is something that we'll possibly see. But it was kind of hard to gauge just because we actually changed, Talia at some point in time during that time period. So that was cool. Yeah, I think for me, some of those have been the like more interesting ones. I'll also, kind of mention the elephant in the room of like Poppy anything, it turns out, is pretty decent. Was definitely not, I think, one of our intended, kind of like we think this is what's going to happen. So that's also, been kind of cool.
Yeah. Sure.
About Shellfolk, you said that was a card that you printed and were like, yeah, maybe somebody used this in like some kind of one-off deck. But are there any more cards that had that effect? I can think of Glorious Evolution, like one that actually kind of rose to some power in the Fizz Vi deck, where you kind of OTK with Poro Cannon. Are there any more cards like that?
Yeah, I think each like release we try and include some number of those decks where the explicit goal of that card isn't like it goes into this archetype or it's supposed to be good or it's something along those lines. They're usually cards that are like, this seems like it'll be a cool effect. I don't know, maybe someone will break it or not. But we try to leave those open as a like, we're not solving the puzzle here, and we're explicitly kind of like letting you like y'all go figure out what that could do or be. I think for at least for this release, Shellfolk was definitely one of them. Avatar of the Tides was another one. Mirai Great Mother was also one where like, yeah, maybe there's something really silly here. So those are, I think, some of the big ones. Treasure Trash is another one where no one's broke that one, and I'm kind of happy about that because that card had the potential to do some really weird stuff. But yeah, I think at least for that release, those are some of the big ones that we were like, yeah, maybe something interesting will happen here, but there was no explicit goal.
Very nice. Yeah, there's definitely some shocking things in there for sure. So we're gonna jump to Magic Misadventures here, and really, we're just gonna go through each champion one by one, and really just discuss, I guess, overall design process. And then if Sunny and I have any follow-up questions about particular kit that they're coming with, we'll throw those at you. But you were mentioning Yordles being at the forefront, so we'll start with one here. Can you just tell us the, I guess, design goal of Kenne? This is probably the only one on the list that I am very familiar with in League. The other ones I don't think I'm good enough to play, but Kenne was my boy. So can you tell us how you kind of transferred his kit into Legends of Runeterra?
Yeah, so Kenne and Ahri both were ones where we explicitly kind of had this idea of like, I should step back and say, one of the things that we'll often do when we're designing sets, especially the further out we get from like launch, is kind of look at what are archetypes that we previously worked on or we've had out in the game that either we think there's a new cool interesting take on it that we can do, or is just something where we feel like the initial release didn't get quite enough support, and try and like figure out ways to kind of reinvigorate those. Discard is a great example of that. And so with this one with Kenne and Ahri, or Kenne specifically, it was like, we kind of know how his kit plays in League. He's this little, ninja rat at the top lane that tries to build up these electric stacks and then stun you and then kind of pop in ult and deal a bunch of damage. Was kind of like his like initial, we know those are the big moments from League. But we had to kind of pick which part of his kit we wanted to really focus on. And Mark of the Storm felt like it was the cool thing because it's the like, you feel smart when you can build up the stacks on your opponent's, your opponent, and then like being able to stun them for the big, swing is like cool. And with that as our seed for Kenne, it was kind of like, all right, let's figure out what archetype we think he would fit well into, and like what's something that's going to embody that pretty well. And Recall felt like a pretty good synergy there because he's pretty hard to pin down, and it was I think a space that we just hadn't really filled out. And so from there, it was pretty easy for us to like kind of like look at what are the obvious holes we think exist within that archetype, and started kind of designing around those, with this kind of like stun and tricky play style that we had kind of carved out for him.
Very cool.
Was there any thought that went into making him a 1-drop? Because so far in Runeterra's history, I think almost every 1-drop champion has seen a lot of play, namely Teemo and Zoe, I think. Fizz too. Was there anything that went into design of the card, making him 1-man and, you know, making him pretty flexible in what deck he goes into?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a great call. I think when we initially were looking at him, 1-drop wasn't the explicit plan. But it was kind of like lower cost, because we know for the recall package in general, or like what we even internally call it is like kind of like bounce house. It's a pretty mana intensive archetype. Like you really need to be able to have the mana to be able to play, return something to hand, and then play it again. That's like just a pretty high investment. And so like having him be 5 or 6 mana makes it pretty difficult unless he has some sort of rider that justifies that cost. And so from there, it was a pretty easy pairing of like, yeah, we probably want him early in the curve. And I think when we're looking at archetypes, there's generally the question of kind of like which champion should be coming down first, and creating the play pattern that the other champion can either follow up on, or take advantage of in some way, or augment. And so between him and Ahri, it felt like a lot of sense of Kenne coming down as the early utility piece, and kind of like setting up the board, and secondarily, like this quest of like him kind of like the summoning multiple times naturally wants us to have him be earlier in the game, so that you have the ability to kind of like get that online as early as possible.
So for the in and out type of combat, so really, I guess Lightning Rush for his skill set in League was the main reason for recall. So I can totally see the stun of being, obviously, once you get those 3 stacks, you get the stun off. But is that how you came to the recall package more so?
Yeah, sometimes we get lucky with champions where there's like a really easy 1-to-1 mapping of like this ability in League is exactly this thing that we could do in our game. Awesome. Like misfortunes, bullet time is like great. Yeah, that's just waves of damage that it makes itself. We actually don't have to do much.
Yep.
For Kenne, we did have to get a little more creative on like what is the essence of like Lightning Rush, and it's effectively a spell that's focused on just being really hard to hit and being really fast.
Yeah.
And so like what was our good translation of like what is really fast?
Makes sense to me. Any other Kenne questions, Sonny? Anything in particular come to mind for Kenne? Or
mostly that level up animations. He's like throwing his little shuriken into an eye. What's going on there? Is that anything that's like teases anything, or should we be looking into that?
That's a good question. I unfortunately don't have too much of the narrative side on that one beyond in initial planning. One of the things we always try to do is like, hey, we know this champion from League. In Kenne's case, there's not a ton of story around like who his followers are, who he hangs out with. And so our narrative at our art team, we're very excited, like, hey, so could we like him doing like, could they just be like elemental ninjas fighting kaiju? And so that was a pretty easy sell, it turns out.
That works.
And so I know that was kind of the initial seed of like, yeah, let's just have them fighting giant monsters. And, I have no doubt that there's some like good detail of or backstory of like what these things are and that kind of stuff. But that was basically the initial seed of, yeah, we just wanted him to fight giant monsters.
Yeah,
we've seen cats versus dogs, and we're moving on to squirrels versus dinosaurs. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's the natural progression.
We had a huge debate. I was like, is this Void? Is it Vel'Koz, etc. But if you don't follow Den, he's the art lead over Legends of Runeterra. He put out the sketches of that monster. Apparently, it's some spirit realm aberration thing. It's got like 6 eyes. It's wild. It's a kaiju.
Yeah,
like you said. Yeah.
Den is probably one of my favorite artists to work with because he's one of those artists where if you're like, hey man, this is what I'm thinking, you can like go to lunch and come back and he'll just have like these insane just concept pieces that he's basically just doodled on or kind of like jammed out over the next couple of hours. And so it's always been one of the nice parts about the office is like walking past the kind of like the art pit just seeing him like working on something crazy and being like, hey man, what's this? He's like, well, I thought a dog would be cool, so then I just made it really sick and here's some things. And it's like, how did you start with a dog with this? Or like, how did you start with this basic thing? And now we have, this awesome looking monster.
Incredible. Yeah, seriously. His artwork's absolutely insane. So you guys don't follow him, please do. I think we should go to Ahri next. It wasn't our plan, but I think it just makes the most sense in this discussion. So obviously she's got some synergy with Kenne right off the bat, like you've been discussing. Can you just kind of talk about her design process as a whole?
Yeah, Ahri was a tricky one. I mentioned this a little bit, I think when we announced her, and that Ahri is a champion that like what is core to her kind of depends on how you've interacted with Ahri. So like if you play a lot of League, you have some kind of understandings of like, yeah, her kind of kit is this. I use charm on you and then I dash around or hit you with your Q and kind of kill you.
Right.
If you're playing, if you only see her and you're coming from the mid lane, she's the mage that comes in, ults, kills you somehow, and then is away. Or if you're someone that's like you're coming in and seeing our game from KDA or from other areas, she's this cool character that does these really cool things. And so for Ahri, we kind of had to pick more than the other ones. Like, what's the specific flavor of Ahri you want to go for, and like what can we think we can execute on that's going to feel um, as cool as players think this character is. And so um, for her particular, we did something that we will sometimes do when we have champions that are kind of we're allotting a higher budget for in terms of like complexity and those types of things, where we'll do like a design-a-thon where people will just submit a bunch of that design and then we'll kind of like battle dome against them and see which one's the coolest one that kind of comes out. And so in this case, this was one of those designs where we kind of did like figured out that her ult is one of those areas that's really unique. We don't have a ton of things in our game that plays with something like this.
Yeah.
And then it was a lot of time and iteration of like, well, if we know that she's going to do this, what are the things that we can pair with her to make that feel cool or interesting? As well as like, what is her artistic part that she's bringing in to this package? So in her case, it's like these Ionian kind of like they're not fey creatures, but they are creatures of Ionia that we haven't really explored. These are, very interesting and kind of unique characters that are very much tied to like the Vestayan portion that Ionia has, and kind of like that deeper wood area. And so with those two together, that's kind of how we ended up where we are here.
So for anyone reading her card for the first time, I guess just there's a new bolded text of attack strike. Could you just describe that for us, since that we haven't seen that before on any card?
Yeah, so attack strike is it's interesting that it's not a keyword. It's closer to something like a vocab or kind of like a game action or thing that happens, and then it's essentially just when she's attacking, when she strikes while attacking is kind of like the longer form version of that. But we had to be pretty careful around specifying because we have combat is really complicated in our game and in most games. It's just there's a lot that can happen there. Timing matters a ton, and rather than write that out purely, we actually kind of want to opted for something that players could like hover over and kind of digest a little bit more, so that she did not read like a nombo with other things where you're like, oh, I can use this with single combat and it'll be awesome, or I can use this on defense and it's going to be great. We actually really wanted to make sure that this was something that like players would want to mouse over that, because it is something that's kind of like it's pretty different or fundamentally core to what this card does.
Yeah. Very interesting. Sonny, you got something?
Well, mostly because I've been playing all day, so it's more of me being curious. But Ahri and Kenne were obviously meant to go in a deck together. Right now, we're seeing a lot of Ahri Fizz being played and Kenne Ezreal. Is that something you guys expected too, or was it really like these are pre-built more like Lurk or?
Yeah, so I think I've talked about this the last time I was on here of kind of like linear versus non-linear decks. And linear decks is things like Lurk, where it's like the more you put into this deck, the more you're likely going to have that specific good time.
Yeah.
Ahri, but for the rest of our archetypes, and usually when we're designing things, most of the time we kind of have the philosophy of the two champions should be able to play well together in the deck they're in. If they find decks with other champions, that's like awesome, like great. That's like we're totally happy with that. And so in this case, I think seeing Ahri Kenne together is awesome, and I'm glad to see that people are playing that. Them finding other champions that they pair well with is, I think, pretty natural. And in this case, for both of these champions, given how kind of open-ended their quests are, for my end, it's like it's pretty expected that we would see other versions or iterations kind of pop up as players not only like figure out how the cards play, but also understand what the meta currently is at the time and how they want to adjust for that. And I think that's like a strong point of these types of champions, which are a little more modular.
For sure.
Yeah.
So when I think of I guess of all time during your reveal season, when you put out a video and you show an animation of someone leveling up, but not just the animation of kind of what's happening after they level up, I think of Nautilus for sure. I remember that one being like, oh my god, what am I looking at? This is insane. I remember Pike blowing up the entire board, but the third one is definitely Ahri blowing up your own board. And I was like, what is happening right now? She's just destroying everybody. That's probably one of the most convoluted sequences that you guys have put out, as far as like one thing triggers 10 different things. How did that design process work there?
It was pretty tough. So when we're early on prototyping, we don't have a lot of the visuals that y'all get to see. So we kind of have to do a lot of squinting to make sure that things are happening in a way that we think are going to happen if we get the visuals. And so we went through a lot of iterations of this type of kind of like her ulting through combat until we could nail down something that we felt like there was reasonable counterplay in some capacity as your opponent. Not necessarily like, oh, I know exactly what to do every time, but just an understanding of like, can a player eventually understand how to interact with Ahri after some number of plays? Sometimes we don't have to do that. Some champions are obvious of like, cool, I just don't let them strike. Great. But for Ahri, we actually did have to spend a lot of time playing with and against her to get it to a complexity level where we felt comfortable letting players be able to learn and not feel like after 20 games against Ahri, you still have no idea what she does or what's going on. And then beyond that, I think once we started getting visuals in and we started kind of understanding the gravity of what you can do with her in combat, there was a lot of kind of like playtesting iteration around like, okay, so we think these are the types of ways you can interact with her. Are they actually things that we can do to stop her, or is it like every time she levels up, she just gets to attack, 6 times, and there's nothing you can do about it? And so there was a lot of kind of back and forth with our game analysis team on just kind of like threading the needle on that actually being something interesting. But she is like definitely one of our most complicated like sequencing matters champions that I think that we've released.
Yeah.
She might be the most complicated, but I gotta be honest, after watching it a few times, it was actually fairly obvious what she actually does, so nothing but props on that. It's well done.
Yeah, I think that's our goal for a lot of this stuff is after seeing it work a couple times, you can be like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like, great, that totally makes sense. Or if you're coming from League and I tell you like, yeah, Ahri ults in her when she attacks, she just basically gets to ult and just dash through and hit everybody. Because that was essentially the pitch for it. I think that's where we're hitting like the sweet spot of our designs and making sure that we're like being resonant.
Yeah. So yeah, it's funny because every time I think of Ahri from League, I just think about getting charmed and just getting absolutely murdered as soon as I get charmed. So it's cool to see that, and I was very curious how charm would come in, but it really makes a lot of sense. I mean, adding the recall synergy is cool, but making them vulnerable, drag them out to battle, right? That makes total sense. Yeah, love it.
Yep.
Any other Ahri questions, Sonny?
No, I think that was it. Not a huge fan of Ionia, but I think the cards look pretty cool, so that's impressive. Can't wait to get to my favorite region.
Ionia is always an interesting region for us to design for because they have, I think, for players that have played for a long time, there's just like different types of trauma. Are you like trauma from like the spooky Ezreal time or Karma, time period? Is it Lee Sin kicking you in the face? Is it, like Hecarim ephemeral stuff? Like there's just like this myriad of, things.
Yeah, it's Karma Ezreal, Lee Sin. It's I can go on. My glorious evolution being denied. The list goes on.
Mine all comes from actual League of just losing to those champions in League, and now I lose to them in Runeterra. I'm like, God, dang it! I can't.
We maintain product consistency. It's really important to us. If you're frustrated about them in League, but you're also frustrated about them in our game.
Yep.
Kenne does not feel like a 2-1 top laner. I'm just gonna say that.
He scales. That was the whole. He scales into the late game. So
that's fair. That's fair. He has a good ult.
Nailed it. All right, we're going to save Targon for last because we're Targon fanboys. But before the show started, I found out that Rumble right here was actually Mr. Sunny's one trick here. He was
and I tell this story every time I get the chance. I actually played with Bjergsen 3 times, and I was Rumble twice, and I lost twice against him. But
I mean, that's a good claim to fame.
Yeah, seriously. I don't think Bjergsen was playing in like bronze and silver. But can you just walk us through the design process of Rumble for us?
The Rumble was an interesting one. Sonny, I think as probably a Rumble one jerk, you can understand that his kit is real difficult to try and translate. Like it does a lot of different things. It plays really interestingly, but I would say in terms of like a direct 1-to-1, he's probably one of the perfect examples of what are we going to do here? How do we do this? And so on this one, we actually we had already known at the point with Rumble that we wanted to do kind of like a discard matters, pulling from his theme portion of it, like he's this junkyard Yordle that makes robots or makes these mecha, and that. So using that as kind of like the initial seed, it was like cool. He's going to be this junk scrap guy. There's a good story with him actually, where when we were initially talking about Rumble, our art director, or now art director Andrew Silver, kind of came up because he likes Rumble a lot too, and he kind of in our design narrative art channel, like, hey man, can you promise me that we'll make Rumble 2's like cool? Because I really want to redesign his mech. But I don't want to make his mech too cool for his stats. So can you like make sure he's like really he's like a stat character or something along those lines? Because like these are the ideas I have, and that was one of those where it's like, absolutely yes, we'll find a way to do that. And so going from there, it was a good question of like, okay, well, how do we go about doing that? And at some point when we were trying to figure out like what is his portion of discard, like what is he essentially creating, the idea of like, well, what if we just have like a mecha battle arena? Like we what if it's him and other people at the scrapyard, and they're all kind of like making their own versions of mechs that they kind of fight against each other to see like who's the best. And so that was like the initial feel of it. If you've ever watched like BattleBots or anything, it's kind of like that idea of, your friends have some things, we're all going to build some stuff and then just smash them together. And like, let's see who's the best. And so that was actually really cool. And from there, it was a natural kind of thing of like, all right, so we know we're going in that pattern of discarding as the bigger question was what is discarding kind of represented as? We try to do this a little bit. So with Cyan, like discarding is kind of this idea of like you're bringing these things back to life. And for Rumble, it was you're discarding these cards that you don't need as kind of scrap to then build the mech itself. And that was like a cool thing that we were able to kind of use as a piece of fodder into then building these mechs. Once we started having the daunting task of like, well, how many mechs are we going to do? Do you just like get one at random? Do you get one for one? Do you get to pick? Is it based off the region? And at this point, we kind of knew that Manifest was going to be a big portion of kind of Bandle City's region pie. And so there was the big moment of like, okay, cool. What if you manifest one of these mechs? So that means we need to have a manifest pool that's kind of big enough to justify that. And I don't remember who mentioned it. It might have been our initial like art words guy, Connor Sheehy, who was like, what if we did callbacks from each region? Like, what if we did like a region version of each one of those mechs that's kind of cool? And then also, what if we do little legends for them? Because, he really likes Fury Horn, or he really likes Shisa. I think it was the Shisa that he really liked. And so that's kind of where it came from. And so for the mechs in particular, we kind of had an open design call of, hey, people that really like, X region, pitch us some designs you think would be sweet. And that's kind of how we built these out. So yeah, that's kind of like the long and short of like kind of how we got here with Rumble.
I'm impressed because it does feel very Rumble to me. But the one thing that I thought was really interesting is that you have, like you said, these zombies with Scion and then the mechs with Rumble. But how do you get to pair those together? It's like mechs and zombies. I love it, but it feels so like opposite.
So to be fair, in development, the kind of higher level thing before we had the concept was like these are kind of like they're different flavors on engines or like kind of created creations is kind of like the thought there. And so that's why it was kind of important for us to figure out what is discard like an allegory for. Yeah. Allegory, but a manifestation of in the game. And so that was actually pretty critical for us trying to like figure out how to marry those two together from at least a design standpoint. And then I think our art and narrative team on both sides did a good job of kind of contextualizing that within the actual region itself. But yeah, it was probably one of our bigger interesting things that we kind of had to solve for.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So I mean, you really didn't have much other discard support in the last set beside the Scion package. So were you kind of surprised to see Scion take off as well as he did without these known cards coming in the Bandle City? I know we touched on that at the beginning, but and do you think Rumble will find a place with Scion at some point here as well?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That is actually probably where we spent a lot of our time with development. Was we knew Scion was going to be coming out before Rumble early on because we had to do our kind of like split of what champions go where. And so then from there was a lot of kind of questioning and figuring out design wise, like, hey, our current design package is actually pretty complete. Like, back then, like Jinx, Draven was a pretty complete package.
Yeah.
And it was pretty hard to design cards for. So like, what are we going to do in order to make that feel like something that players are going to want to interact with, and how do we go about doing that? And so a lot of the cards that you see with Sion when he comes out were kind of paired with the intention of he probably pairs well with Draven, or he probably pairs well with Jinx, in a specific way that when Rumble comes out, the Rumble version will feel a little different. And so, for us, it was like we probably think the Sion Draven version is going to be a little more aggressive, or like aggressive mid-rangey, and the Rumble version was initially designed to be like this like value engine where you can kind of like you can just start to churn out these medium or big sized bodies, and then you kind of need to figure out how to close the game out. Probably that is something like Sion, or it's something like Earthshaker, or one of like the larger mechs that can kind of just close out the game really well. But that was trying to kind of how we tried to figure out what we were going to do for the split there, so that when Rumble came out, you just didn't look at him and be like, this is just the same deck. We didn't want that to kind of be the case.
Fair. Really the most important question of all is, do you have a personal favorite Mecha Yordle, not including Rumble?
Yeah, I mean, as the potentially only number one fan of Slotbot, Salty Spinner was
yes,
is definitely up there. He was also the first one we designed, because when I was like, oh, we should do region callbacks, I'm just like, well, we're just gonna make Slotbot again, but with a different thing. So that one's definitely up there. I'll exclude that one because it's like it's not fair. Professor Von Mech is probably my other one that I really like. And this is a extremely like design nerdy thing, but the aesthetics on the card are really nice. He's 4 mana 3/2 that makes that creates a 1, 2, and 3. The cards he creates pairs well with Yip, and like what the different types of Yip cards do, as well as the Piltover cards of like, yep, if you're also wanting to try and do like a 1-cost deck, a 2-cost deck, or a 3-cost deck, this card's that's the dream. Which is to say, it's a lot of stuff that will never matter, but every time I read that card, I'm like, it's a win. It's a win for aesthetics, and that's really what matters here.
Fantastic. We'll take those answers. I was praising the casino bot, but Sony was trashing on it, so just throwing you out there.
I love Slotbot. I was just saying. I mean, if you got to pick, it's probably not your first choice. That's
true.
all I was saying.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's the meme one. Yeah. The cool part is, like, I think a number of these, our team had ones that they personally liked a lot, which was cool. Like,
yeah.
As I mentioned, like the initial writer, Connor, was a huge fan of Smash and Dash, and I think a lot of these made it through. But in the background, a number of these arts, you can kind of like see Smash and Dash, it hit the wall, and like there's another one where they're like they're yelling at each other, and like, or you can see like their vehicle being pulled off the screen, and so there's a lot of like love and care into these.
Fantastic.
And it was I think it was like a cool labor of love to kind of get these out.
Yeah, this is the first Little Legends we have in the game as well, right?
That I believe so. Yes.
Think of yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's also pretty sweet for TFT fans. All right, Sonny, we've made it to the time that we've all been waiting for, which is to discuss the one true region of Targon. So can you walk us through how you design Pantheon, who is just probably one of the most like ridiculous champions? I mean, I guess Aurelion Sol's up there, but just this deity who, even in his animation, jumps to space and then crashes down. How do you design that?
Yeah, Pantheon is a perfect example of kind of letting, like, his kit's cool, and we knew that, like, yeah, we'll do like him doing the man drop, or him doing his jump, like, so like the lead kits are, we can find ways to fit those in. But in terms of like what's a mechanic that we rally him around, art was very much a guiding light here of like, what is he doing in Targon? Like, what are his kind of like characters and going on, and like what are they about? And so finding out from like the rework that he's kind of like, yeah, it turns out he's just like a god and demon killer, and the people he's with are also doing that. Was a really good starting seed for trying to figure out like what is his mechanic, and kind of like how do we go about that. And so as well as like what are the things that we can kind of use within Targon to, what is the kind of like design hole in Targon that we could fill that would feel like it feels good for other cards. And so for Pantheon, it was like he has this his passive at least is like he gets stronger. When you play spells, like he has like these kind of empowered attacks, and the way you use that is like a combo of like use your next empowered attack, jump on somebody, deal a bunch of damage. And so that was like a good seed for us to try. Like, well, what if we do something where like when you cast a spell on him, he gets stronger, and then you get to go do stuff. And so those two pieces kind of paired together got us towards Fated. And we kind of iterated beyond that. We definitely tried some variations of like the, how do you get the +1/+1? Is it permanent? Is it temporary? Can you do it multiple times around? That was about one playtest because someone played the fill your hand with gems and then you just got annihilated. But it was cool. And I think as a note for this one, because it's come up a couple of times from players of like, hey, why are there so few Fated, characters or anything? Part of that is design, and that like it's actually pretty hard to support multiple Fated units on board if you're growing them, because you kind of want to be able to focus resources. But also from a theme perspective, it was something that we tried to maintain, in that we do know that he has like a core group of people he works with. Like his followers are closer to like, that are like legends or specific people that he knows. And so we actually kind of wanted to like make sure that there was a good parallel there of, so it's not like a bunch of people are running around with Fated, because his group is kind of turned away from like normal Targon, beliefs of like aspects and stuff like that.
That's cool.
Okay.
Very cool. So I guess really, I mean, you introduced Fated, and now that keyword, like you said, it can only be on three people, but that is a randomly generated keyword as well, right? So say like Victor could acquire Fated through his Hex Tech upgrades.
Yes, yeah. So it's part of our like normal randomized or random pool. So like, yep, it can be generated, it can be shared, and for those types of things, we're willing to throw our hands in the air around theme or any sort of direction there of
chaos. Yeah, right.
Things can get it's just like things can get Fury. That doesn't mean they look like a dragon. That's totally fine. Because that's part of that's more towards like the gameplay portion of it, and we just kind of have to we know that it's okay, and that's fine.
Great.
After watching Arcane, Fated Victor makes sense.
It's true. It was very true.
All right, so other than that, with Pantheon, I guess I think what you said actually, Sunny and I were discussing before how, I mean, Sunny, you can talk about this too. Is we feel like Pantheon definitely plays different than Targon has before, and you kind of discussed that he is different, right?
Yeah, right. So we were talking about how both of us really had like just a big love for Targon and how their playstyle was, and then that kind of fell a little bit apart when like that big set of nerfs happened with the Fangs and the Serpent and Star Shaping, where they have been a little less playable. But the thing is, with Pantheon, it really feels like they have a very playable deck again. I mean, that's just from day one and playing it, obviously, but it felt very good so far. But it's different. It definitely feels like it brings Targon back. It's different, but it still feels really, really Targon-like. And I'm just impressed how you did that, I guess, with no Celestials actually really being involved, except like that occasional Moonglow that you get. So how did you get there, making it feel so Targon without any of the Targon stuff, except the self-targeting really coming into play?
Yeah, I would credit a lot to our internally we have someone that's kind of like, they're the region pie manager, so their kind of job is like, hey, when you want to design a card in a particular region, like here's what the region, there's our foundational cards, what do they do well, do they not do so well? Prior to Pantheon coming out, we did those nerfs, and a big reason for that was Targon's identity was not as well defined as it could have been, and that actually made it hard for us to design new cards. And so once we kind of like that had gone and passed and we were left with this new design space, it was much easier for us to look and say like, hey, Targon previously has been about these types of things. So there's like, there's Celestials on one portion of it. There's like buffing, there's Nightfall, there's healing, but at their core, like they kind of focus around they've got a lot of like unit protection or just targeting their units, right? Like gems is probably the marquee card there. Yeah. And so the interesting thing for us was, we know this character is supposed to be a little bit of a different take on it. So what is a different take on it that will still feel like it pairs well there? And that whole ended up being on the design end like pretty clear for us, which was great. Fated was probably one of the earliest keywords that made it from initial design all the way to, with some adjustments to final. And that was, I think, ultimately kind of how we went about it, of working with the region, the region guy, and being like, hey, are we straying too far here? Is this okay? Does this make sense? So that paired with our game analysis team, who their job is just to know the game really well and be able to give us a realistic answer on what we think our archetypes we think we're going to do. And they were also, a pretty good job of like, yeah, this doesn't feel like Targon, or this does feel like Targon, and here's why, or here's how we go about doing that, from a like purely mechanical perspective, and like game to game feel. And so I give all of the credit to those two parties on this one. The rest of the design team was, we were still playtesting, but like they actually I think put in a lot of the heavy work there.
Yeah, it definitely feels like Faded slots right into Targon super well. Feels like it fits into their core identity. I also really like that the Blinded Mystic adds another form of silence for the region that, kind of introduced that. And then as well as Ayula also giving Spell Shield, right? It also came out around when Targon came out. So you have another unit that gives Spell Shield. Other than the, I forget the name of the one what is the crazy one, Sonny? I know you know it. The 3-drop 2/2, who if you, the
3-drop 2/2.
Yeah, she gives spell shield if you have a celestial.
Oh,
Oh my gosh, her name's bonkers. I forget what it is. I just can't remember it. It's so
it's one of Zoe's followers.
It's one of Zoe's followers. She's nuts.
Yeah.
With the Gidley Sparkleologist.
I knew you had it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Sparkleologist. Yes.
Yeah, that's the one.
I'm like, I know it's just so absurd, but I'm never gonna get it right now. And then also gems as well from the Freed Colossus. Yeah, gems, silence, and spell shield all coming back in. So very cool.
Yeah, one of the cool parts of designing card like archetypes and stuff, once you have the region like established a little bit, is it's a little bit like putting together your own puzzle of like, hey, we have all these kind of pieces that we know exist here. So we have like silence, and spell shield, and celestials, and day and night. And so like, how do we put these things together in a way that is new or different or feels different? And sometimes it's really easy because it's like, hey, I think in the case for silence, we don't have a lot of instances of that. Most of it's locked behind celestials. So great. That's actually a great space for us to be able just to put that in there, and make that a thing that we know that we want them to be able to do, but also kind of like reinvigorate that a little bit. And that's like one of the fun parts about doing card game or like card design.
For sure. Sonny, any other Targon questions here?
I guess one last thing about the level up and just getting a bunch of keywords. It's a good way to finish the game, but how did you get to that? Just making the Targon victor.
Yeah, that was a fun one. So like I said originally, like when we agreed, we knew that we were doing Pantheon. It's like, well, we're doing Azul. Like that's not a discussion. That's not like a maybe we won't do it. It's like we're gonna do it. It's just how do we go about realizing it in game. And so originally it was actually a spell, or variations of a spell of like, him coming in and dealing a bunch of damage, or like him disappearing from the board. And a lot of those kind of didn't work out because they required him to leave, which is weird when you're kind of wanting to stack him with a bunch of stuff from Faded. And so once we started to look at like, well, what are again, this is like one of those, how do we realize this in a way that is good for our game? And the getting keywords was actually one of the ones where, from the design end, we knew Faded gets you a lot of stats, but it's very easy to make like kind of like a high statted unit with no keywords to actually end the game. So what is the dream for a Faded unit is, it's keywords. It's like overwhelm. It's like spell shield, so you can't get removed. Maybe elusive. Maybe barrier, so you can survive the initial attack if you have to go again. There was an initial thought of like, well, what if we just give him like a couple keywords on the flip, and he's more of like a utility based or more of a like kind of like a workhorse champion. And once we started talking with Reels about it, our realization team, they were like, well, what we want to do for his level up is him doing the Skyfall. And that was very easy for us to be like, okay, well, we can't just give him like 2 keywords. That's not enough. What if we just gave him all the keywords and see how that felt? And there was some iterations around there on like he used to give very specific keywords, and that felt pretty oppressive. And also just not as exciting because like if he always gets barrier, overwhelm, tough. That big moment of him coming in is like actually kind of pulled away a little bit. And so from there it was like, well, let's just spin the wheel and see like what are the things we can get. He already has a lot of keywords on him to begin with, so it was actually a little easy for us to understand like what's the range of outputs in terms of like, hey, is this going to be safe or not? But yeah, and then I think the last part is like it's just a cool moment. It's cool. It's like really cool to see him do this big moment, and then he just has a bunch of keywords, and you feel really awesome. And that is a thing that we I think when we can is really important for us to do, because while card games are a bunch of math and other things, like they're cool things too, and we get to make those, and that's something we should celebrate, whenever we can.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to level them up. I haven't yet. I only got to play a few games today, but went right to crafting, made Pantheon Jarvan, and was just like, all right, gotta play him. But I didn't get to level them up yet. One day, and then I'll have that moment. So we're gonna move
Feels really
beyond.
good. Trust me.
Oh, you did it?
Yeah,
New
yeah,
video
multiple
soon?
times.
I need to check it. I need to see what it's like. So moving past the champions, so we covered the four, which is new too. I mean, previously, I guess it's something to touch on super quickly, but previously we normally would get 3 champions in each of the mini releases after. So this is, I believe, the first one that had 4 champions in a mini release. That's just due to the sheer amount of champions that have to come out, I'm assuming now, with Bandle adding the 10th region.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. We very much had a like N+1 kind of situation when we were releasing each new region, because we want to be able to have those pairings. And so, yeah, the benefit of being the last region is it will also have like kind of the most champions coming out.
Love it. So we're going to go on and touch on, I think, 2 or 3 other cards that are in the release but aren't champions, which aren't, obviously the major focus of the set. The first one I want to talk about, which I would get killed if I didn't ask, is the Yordle Explorer. So I guess real quick, can you just give me your thoughts on the community's reaction to the expectation of the power level of the Yordle Explorer?
Yeah. So I'll kind of make 2 statements here. I think the first one is, regardless of the actual power level of the card, I think the important thing here is that like y'all are pretty frustrated about the state of Bandle City's power level, as well as just like the proliferation of Poppy and the Poppy kind of shell that appears. And so I think even if this card was like the worst card ever, the fact that it is a card for that archetype feels, I think in a lot of cases feels like salt in the wound. And so, I think that's completely reasonable. There are a ton of reasons why this card came out when it did. We have long development times. It's actually pretty difficult for us to just like remove this from the release, because we have other things that are associated with it from other teams. But that aside, that is a thing that we like. At least I personally like. I understand. I recognize you guys are fully, kind of justified in being like, hey, what's going on here? As for the actual power level of the card, I do think it reads more exciting or more good than it is, particularly just because that deck is, it's relatively juiced, and that card doesn't do anything immediately when it comes out, right? But I am I'm happy to be wrong. I will probably be proved wrong, but we'll see. But yeah, I think for me, or at least from my observation of it, is it's less so about Yordle Explorer's power level versus just this is another thing on this thing that we already know is kind of frustrating, and like, why is this card here when we feel like there's an issue already. So yeah.
Fair. I mean, dude, he's super adorable. I can't believe he's got binoculars around his neck and the 2 mini glasses on top. Like, he's just incredible card. I mean, literally one of the funniest card arts. And this is in a set that just introduced 12 Mecha Yordles, so it's saying something. I love the dude. Sonny,
Yeah,
anything about?
our team kills it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sonny, anything about Yordle Explorer?
No. I mean, I did tweet about it. I think the reaction of the community as a whole was exactly like just mentioned. It was, the card isn't even in the game yet, so we don't really know. So it's exactly just that fact that it came out for an archetype that was already pretty strong. But yeah, time will tell. I don't think it's going to dominate right now. So yeah. We'll
Yeah,
see.
and I think one of the things I would mention here is, because like we've been pretty public about this, of the patch, the next patch does have adjustments that we are looking at, Bandle City as a whole, as well as Poppy. And I don't. My thing is like I know that it's easy for players to kind of point at that card and be like, this card is the problem, but I wanted to kind of like, I want you guys to understand that like we do realize that it is not just this card, and this card is probably a red herring, but there's some fundamental like structural things that we need to be looking at for Bandle City, in order for that region and Poppy to feel not like they're everywhere. And so that is the stuff that we'll be looking at when we're kind of as we're like getting up to that point.
Yeah, totally fair. And I guess a quick break from talking about the other cards. We did have a patch drop with this, which we didn't know at the time of the reveal of the Order Explorer, but both the Young Witch got -1 health, and Poppy got a -1/-1 if I recall correctly. So, you're also working on live design as well. Did you want to touch on that real quick for us, Alex?
Yeah, so we generally don't like doing balanced releases with a new set coming out. And a big reason of that is like we actually just don't know what y'all are going to do when a new set comes out. If we had, I can promise you that Poppy would not have come out with the stats that she did. But you guys are, as I usually say, are extremely good at just doing weird stuff or doing stuff in a way that would actually be difficult for us to kind of like predict or understand. Shelf Oak deck is like the prime example of like we did play with that card, but like the time it took for y'all to get to that point was a relatively long time, and so it would have been even longer for us. However, we did make that commitment in October around just trying to be more reactive to things, and so in this case, we wanted to make sure that there was something that we knew would be able to at least kind of like address what's going on. It's not a full solve, and in this case in particular, with this release, we didn't want to do like a full patch on this one because we know that we know that the Ahri Kenne deck is potentially very good. We know that Pantheon does a lot, and Rumble is this kind of big unknown. And so when looking at like what changes do we want to make here, we were reasonably confident that there's a chance that like those decks just run over Poppy and it's not even an issue. But rather than just saying, hey, we're not going to do anything at all, what are the things that we can do that will kind of like help with what's going on? Young Witch back to 1/1, I think, is probably a pretty big one, especially because like the axis in which that deck was doing things is just so kind of like tilting that made sense. And then as for the Poppy nerf, there's definitely more we can do there, and it's not unnoticed. But we, at least with this type of release, we did want to chip away at it a little bit. And I'm making, I will say that like this isn't a situation like we've done in the past where every patch we're gonna like chip away at Poppy a little bit, and then 8 months from now she'll be in a space that's playable. This was let's see if this gets us where it needs to be. But the balance patch, that we have coming up, more fully addresses kind of like the situation that we've got going on.
Very nice. Very nice. The last card I have a question about, and then I'll let Sunny have one if he wants one as well. But I really want to talk about the Minion because I don't know if we touched on it a whole lot in the last podcast, but I've heard that the Minion wasn't canon. I heard Minions weren't canon in lore before Runeterra really put them out as Vagar's whatever beings. But you now have the Minion, which this one looks in particular to be the ranged Minion. So the main question that everyone wanted me to ask you is Super Minion and Canon Minion when, as well as Melee Minion.
Good questions. That is one of those. I think this card, as well as like the whole Vagar package, was a. I think I mentioned before. Connor Sheehy, who's one of our writers. He goes by Fizz and Chips on Twitter.
Yeah.
He just loves Vagar, and so when we were originally working on him, he kind of came up as like, "Hey, so I kind of want to do some like weird evil league stuff with Vagar. Is that cool?" And we're like, "Well, what do you mean?" And so he listed out some of the characters he was thinking about. We're like, "Yeah, just let me know what you want the designs to be, man. I'll work with you to like make sure that we're doing this weird wacky thing." And so that's kind of how we ended up with a lot of those, and Minion is one of them. And I would not. It's one of those I can't promise it because future design stuff. But I also would not be surprised if this pops up again in sometime in the future. It really kind of comes down to like player feel, and I think like opportunity space.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's in the same field of people wanting like the red buff now that blue buff's in the game. It's like everyone just wants every single character that's in League, every part of the map. Now they probably want the new Chemtech dragons and things like that as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, when you start a cycle, if you don't fix the cycle or finish the cycle, players and designers will be very agitated every time. We're like, well, we could, like, we already did 3 of them, but there's 4, so we could do the 4th one, right?
Exactly. Sunny, any final questions there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say also that it's also actually called Blue Sentinel. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just part of the Senate package. Um,
Okay.
One question I had actually is so we had so many Yordles going to regions that are not like exactly where they're I don't want to say meant to be, but some are like kind of a stretch in some way. So I just have to ask, like, in Noxus, Rumble versus Kled, was that discussed? Because Kled is Noxus, so I think
Yes.
some people were a little confused about that one.
Yeah, I was wondering when I was going to get this question because no one on my expectation when Rumble came out, and I asked our comms guy about it beforehand of like, hey, so should we have something ready about the whole Rumble Kled thing? And he was smart in saying like, let's actually let players tell us that's a problem and not start a fight preemptively. And so yes, I will kind of go into that. No, it's good. We did consider Kled when we were looking at what champions we wanted to do. As I think you guys are saying, like Kled is a very easy windmill slam in Noxus.
Yeah.
So much so that we actually kind of had to do the question of, these pairings were supposed to be, Bandle City X, and Kled is a unique case where he is kind of like the soul of Noxus in this way. He's like he's a mythical character that shows up to defend Noxus, even from other Noxians. And there was a bit of a larger question of like, hey, if we put him in Bandle City, what story are we telling? Because he's kind of this loner that doesn't really interact with his kind, and does it have the level of support we would need in order to make a Kled that feels like Kled in Bandle City as part of his kit? And at least in the initial designs that I worked on him, every iteration of Kled felt much better as a mono Noxus, almost like an Allegiance style character. And so that kind of ran counter to what we were trying to do with Bandle City. Especially once we'd kind of figured out that like, hey, discard is the general space we want him to be in. Trying to justify discard for him was actually also pretty difficult, just from a like, what does his league kit do into ours? So that was kind of like one of those in combination were kind of the big reasons for us to move away from Kled in that specific spot and find another champion that we felt like we could tell an interesting story for and would align well with mechanics. And so that's kind of how we moved over to like Rumble as the example there.
Right. Yeah, and I don't want to make the question too long, but I'm assuming it was something similar with Vex versus Viger, for example. Or Vex is too recent, maybe.
So there is a little bit of like when it comes to those champions, like Vex, I think I don't think Vex was far enough along in development at the time that we were working on Bandle City to be able to design a whole champion around them. That's actually a pretty difficult thing for us to do. We ran into this a little bit with Senna, and that while we were working on Senna, Senna was about to come out, but not yet. And so we actually, that was a little easier because we could just book a meeting. Like I could book a meeting with August, who's the designer of Senna, and be like, hey, what's the latest on Senna? Can I get it in on the playtest? What's the champion doing? If we design cards like this, is it okay? Do you feel weird about that? And with Vex, either she hadn't been started yet or she was so early on in her design that the ability for us to kind of like confidently pin designs to that would have been really difficult. And I think one of the kind of like big disappointments would have been Vex comes out in League looking like she does, and our Vex is just like either nowhere near the same or is off just a little bit or just enough that it feels like we weren't in communication internally. And I think those are things that we we want to make sure that we're putting out the best version that we can, and that ultimately kind of like gets in the way of that.
Okay. Very nice. Very nice. You guys did nail it with Akshan before, so that was very well timed when you released those two at the same time. That was super impressive because he certainly feels that way in both games.
Yeah. I think the team that worked on Akshan, and Viego, I think was another one where like they did a really good job of working with the League team to make sure that we were on the same page when it came to like what their designs and their packages were going to look like.
For sure. Yeah, got to be a challenge. Well, Alex, thank you very much. Sonny, if you don't have any further questions, I just want to say thanks, Alex, for hopping on to the show, talking about these 4 awesome new champions and some of the concerns of the community. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a general pleasure to be able to nerd out about stuff, especially cards. And I appreciate you guys letting me ramble on.
Of course. Till next time, guys.
Thank you.
See ya. Thank you for checking this episode of the Twin Suns Podcast out. If you're looking to support us in other ways, you can check us out on YouTube at the Twin Suns Podcast. You can also check us out on Discord. Join our Discord where we have tons of great discussions and keep you posted on all of the content we make. You can follow us on Twitter, which is just twitter.com/thetwinsunspod. You can also follow our co-host, Cruisin, and Josh, and even Mikey, all on Twitter as well. All of those links will be in the description of the video or the podcast that you just listened to or watched, as well as Twitch streams. We have all four of us are also streaming on Twitch occasionally, so you can feel free to dive into those. If you want to support us on Patreon to go even a step further, feel free to head over to patreon.com/thetwinsunspodcast. We have a bunch of different tiers there where you can actually get different upgrades and different support for the show and actually get some nice rewards as well. And finally, if you want to check us out on Teespring, we have a bunch of cool swag based on the logos that we've had made for the podcast over the life of the show itself. So thank you guys again for all of the support, and catch you next time.